Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged. This is the Mangina Dialogues. We at it again with your host Nick Scopes and the Gregolicious. You know how we do, cause you know we keeping it gangster and silly. Unplugged like a full swung titty. About get jitty, cause you know we down to the nitty and the gritty. And we make shit sound so damn pretty. Yeah, cause this unhinged comedy. And right now you're in the mix, so get ready, cause we about to get it poppin'. And we ain't stopping. Uneducated, unfiltered, unhinged.
Hello and welcome to the Mangina Dialogues. I am your host, Nick Scopes.
And I'm the unfunny Greg Alprin.
And the very honest Greg Alprin today. That's good. Our guest today is one of those guests where I see the email and I see we're going to interview someone and I go, how the hell did we get this person? How did we manage this? We're doing so well, apparently. Our guest today is the founder of Comedy Central, Art Bell. What's up, Art? How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
No, thanks. Again, like I said in the beginning, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
what are you doing here? Seriously. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing?
I love you guys. I mean, what do you mean? I like talking about this stuff with guys like you, you know, because you probably don't know that much about how Comedy Central started, right? You figured it just showed up one day.
That's what my earliest memory, people always ask me, did you want to be a stand-up when you were a kid? And I was like, I mean, I watched some stand-up. I didn't really thought, but the one stand-up special that kind of I watched repeatedly over and over again was Jim Brewer's on Comedy Central.
Yeah.
I think I was in 7th or 8th grade. We watched that. I can't even tell you how many times. And that was probably the only time where I was like, comedy, stand-up. That was my first probably exposure to like stand-up comedy when I was like 12 or so. So
that's kind of late.
It was. I mean, there were other things. Like I remember, I guess there was the Kings of Comedy year 2000 that came out. But I used to watch a lot of like old stuff with my dad and my grandmother, like Dean Martin roasts and it was like, like that stuff. So it was like, it wasn't pure stand-up, but it was just like, Don Rickles making fun of everybody and
hey,
shit,
it's all comedy, man.
Yeah,
it's all funny.
That's the first one that like clicked for me, where I was like, "Oh, Jim Brewer, 8th grade. I remember that." You know what I mean?
Nick is too young to remember that it was actually not called Comedy Central when it started. Right? It was the comedy.
No, that's right. You're absolutely right.
Comedy Channel.
We started as the Comedy Channel.
Yeah,
because that's. If you're going to name an all comedy channel something, why not call it the Comedy Channel?
Good creative marketing.
It's actually kind of interesting. I don't know if you heard this story, but the reason we changed the name to Comedy Central is because it was the Comedy Channel. We started the Comedy Channel. Then 6 months later, we got some competition from MTV networks. They started something called Ha.
Right.
Greg, you remember that?
Vaguely. Like I read that and I'm like, it's a vague memory to me, but I definitely remember when the Comedy Channel started because
right. Yeah.
I was in college or about to be in college. And I remember when I was going through like picking my, like the 10 channels I could afford, like when I was picking cable, I was always like, I have to have I just needed that. So I always remember the Comedy Channel and then eventually obviously changed to the Comedy Central. Right. But I don't have a clear memory of it, but it's vague.
Yeah. Well, anyway, they showed up 6 months after we did, to compete.
Yep.
And then we were head to head for like 6 months and then they merged us, which to me was that was kind of a personal tragedy.
Right.
Because I thought we were good and would prevail. Anyway, they threw us together and they said, okay, you guys figure out what the new channel looks like and you got to rename it. You can't call it Comedy Channel, can't call it Ha.
Right.
I raised my hand. I said, why can't we call it Comedy Channel? Come on, guys. No.
But that's crazy. Who was president of the network at that point?
A guy named Bob Creek.
And was that not of Comedy Channel, but was it owned by Viacom, right? Obviously.
Comedy Central. Yeah. When they merged the channels, they brought a guy in named Bob Creek. He had been working at Fox.
Right. Because I know a few guys who were at the early days of MTV. And, I've had lots of weird different conversations with them over time. Do you know John Baum?
No.
He was at MTV when it started. And it's just always interesting to me how all of the things like kind of fell together, right? But what were you doing before Comedy Central? or the Comedy Channel?
Well, I was working at HBO, and I was working as kind of a financial analyst, which was not really in the heart of the comedy department at HBO, as you can
You're
imagine.
kidding.
Seriously. But I guess Nick was talking about when he was in seventh grade, he started to look at comedy and stand-up comedy and everything. For me, it was earlier than that. For me, I was like 6 or 7. And I was watching the Ed Sullivan Show, which was a weekly variety show. And that's where I saw Richard Pryor the first time. He was about 20 years old, just a kid. And all the Borscht Belt comics, Alan King and those guys whom I loved. And that's where I started, really developing my love for comedy. I said, man, these guys are funny. How do you do that?
Right.
And anyway, so to make a long story short, I ended up at HBO because I wanted to be close to television and comedy, but I wasn't a programming guy.
Right.
But I'd had this idea for an all comedy channel because hell, there was an all news channel, an all music channel, all that stuff. I said, why can't I work at an all comedy channel? And the reason was there isn't one.
Right.
So I went to the head of HBO programming. Her name was Bridget. And I said, Bridget, I think HBO ought to do an all comedy network. And she said, stop right there. That is the worst idea I've ever heard. And she spent about 15 minutes telling me why it was the worst idea. I'll give you some of her key points. She said that no comedian would want to be on it. She said that there was too much comedy on television already. And she said nobody wanted to watch comedy for 24 hours a day. And I said, well, I do, but
yeah,
that's just me. Anyway, she, that didn't go very far. So it took me a while before somebody at HBO, was actually the chairman of HBO, heard about my idea and what I wanted to do and said, maybe we should try this. So,
right. But that's gotta be pretty wild for a guy that's in the accounting department to pitch creating a network and actually following through on that. Like, how does that go? At the time, obviously the cable business was much different, back then. There was not that much of it. I mean, compared to what there is today.
Well, what? It's interesting you say there's not that much of it. I mean, there wasn't that much of it, but it was a lot more expensive to start a channel.
Sure.
I mean, by the mid 2005, 2006, you could start a channel out of your garage.
Right.
And that's what YouTube basically became, right? Everybody had their own channel. But in those days, you needed a giant uplink facility. You needed, all kinds of infrastructure to get your signal out. And so it was very expensive, which is why there weren't all that many channels in those days.
Yeah.
So I couldn't, it wasn't the kind of thing where I could start it on my own. And I pitched HBO because as I said, I loved comedy, had the idea for a long time. I couldn't believe there wasn't one. And when they finally said yes, man, I thought I had a tiger by the tail at that point because I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I had the idea and I knew what I wanted it to be and how it was going to work. But they teamed me up immediately with a guy named Stu Smiley. Do you know Stu? Did you ever run into Stu?
No.
Head of comedy development at HBO. And he knew everybody. He knew Robin and Whoopi and Billy and all those guys. First name, had their home numbers, the whole thing. He'd been in the comedy business for 10 years. Right. I'd been in the comedy business 0 years. Right. And the first time I met him, he said, what do you know about comedy? That was the first thing he said to me, and he didn't say it nicely either, right. And he didn't really teach me much. I mean, I learned a lot, but I had to teach myself about the comedy business. This guy had been in it for 10 years. So I was working with comedy professionals. And as you pointed out, I had been in the finance department. I didn't know what I was doing.
Well, I mean, at the time, HBO, I mean, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but they were the comedy business. At the time with the young comedian specials, right? And comic relief and all those things that they were, known for, and having, that's where you go to watch comedy specials. There was no other place.
Well, you're right to a certain extent, because what was going on then was the comedy club thing was really coming together in the United States. There started to be comedy clubs all over the place. Secondly, HBO got into that comedy business in the mid 80s, and they put together those specials, very high end, very well produced specials with A talent. Sure. And that was great. But you may not remember this. A&E had a show called A&E at the Improv. It was every night at 7:30.
Right.
And they played every comedian who was alive in those days. Did A&E at the Improv, brick wall, microphone, 35 people out front, cheaply produced. And if you went out in those days, said, where do you find comedy on television? 3/4 of people would say, ain't at the Improv. You know, I watched that because it was on every night.
Right.
And not everybody had HBO. So one of the things I said to HBO is like, hey, man, you guys, you're going to lose the comedy franchise to that, you know, to A&E, who has no business being in it.
Sure.
And that got them kind of like riled up.
Because then even VH1 went, right? And they developed a comedy series with Rosie O'Donnell, like back in the early 90s.
Yeah. But, you know, you got to remember, comedy was all over the place. As Bridget said, she said, there's comedy all over the place. What do you need a 24-hour channel for? But I said, look, you know why you need a 24-hour channel? Because you're going to have a channel where things that wouldn't get on the air anywhere else would have a place to go. You know what I mean? Innovative comedy. That's what I kept thinking about. And one of the things that happened when we first started the channel, this was like we had just announced it. And we got in the mail, Mystery Science Theater 3000, a tape from the guys who were making it. And I saw the tape and we're sitting around watching it like, we can't believe our good luck. This shows up in the mail.
That's fine.
And I realized then that, you know, that was not going to go to NBC. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that was not going to go. Even HBO wouldn't have taken that.
Right.
But for us, man, that was great. And the note said, hey, we hear you guys are starting a comedy channel. Is this something you'd be interested in? You know?
You got to think like where else where Chappelle's show gone, Daily Show, like NBC, ABC, they're not going to pick that up probably. Fox, you know what I mean?
The Chappelle show is an interesting example. Now, I was gone by the time Chappelle got there, but Chappelle had shopped that all over the place.
Yeah.
You know, and he thought
I'm sure.
You know, he wanted a deal at HBO or one of those places, but he ended up at Comedy Central, which was good for Comedy Central. Yeah. And him ultimately, I think.
Yeah, of course.
But you're right. It wasn't going to go anywhere else.
So when go ahead, Nick.
No, what I was going to say was we had Madeline Smithberg on. Yeah, she's the best. But I was telling her, talking about, you know, Comedy Central and like the Daily Show. I probably until the age of 25 got all my news from the Daily Show. I'm not kidding. Like I didn't watch CNN until I was 25 years old. But my whole life, like when I wanted to just know what was going on politically, I watched Jon Stewart because I couldn't stand the regular news. I was like, this guy's funny and he knows what the hell he's talking about. He's not dumb. So that was how I got my news from the age of 12 until I was 25 years old.
You know, you're not the only person to say that. I mean, I think that was one of the most interesting things about Comedy Central and ultimately the Daily Show was that a whole generation discovered news and discovered that there was that they should pay attention to what was going on. Whereas before they didn't pay attention. Yeah. So I think that was really a good thing.
So how long was your run at Comedy Central?
Well, it was 8 years altogether.
Right.
I left in 1996. But by that time, that was around the time the Daily Show was coming in. That was around the time South Park came in.
Sure.
And, you know, we had gotten it to the point where we knew it was going to be successful.
Right.
So that made me feel really good.
And is South Park what really like blew it up was when South Park hit the network?
I think that the Daily Show and South Park made it, you know, kind of world famous.
Right.
But it's not like it wasn't, you know, doing well before that.
Sure. No, I remember I was not a big South Park watcher, but of course I watched it when it came on right around that time, of course. And it was one of those, you know, properties. I'm in the consumer products business that just sort of took the country by storm. Right. Like it came on and it was so forget the word. Irreverent. Nick loves when I stumble on words. It doesn't happen.
He's wearing a Britney Spears t-shirt. Don't expect much from him, you know?
You know, that it was, you know, they certainly took that shock jock mentality, like a Howard Stern show that he was doing on E! You know, and sort of brought that much more mainstream with the topics that they were covering and the language that they used, and having a piece of shit be like a character in the show, you know, like all of these things that there's literally no other place they really could have done that network wise, on a weekly basis the way they did it, besides a place like the Comedy Channel, the Comedy Central. Like, did you have any role in that? Was it like even on like the table when you were there? Like,
Yes. Well, I didn't have much of a role in it. What happened was, and I don't know if you know the story, those guys sent around a Christmas card, an animated Christmas card, and they sent it to all the networks. And it got around to everyone, and it certainly made its way to Comedy Central. And we saw the thing, and we were hysterical. And you say it wouldn't have ended up anywhere else. I think MTV wanted it very badly.
oh, really?
Yeah, MTV wanted it, but Comedy Central got it.
Right.
And I remember the conversation we had with the head of advertising sales at Comedy Central. Now, you know that ad sales, I don't know if you guys have advertising here, but the advertisers, they're not sure they want to be associated with anything controversial.
Oh, totally. Of course.
Right. So we showed the Christmas card to the ad sales guy, and the guy almost had a heart attack,
I bet.
What was the Christmas card? Can you describe it?
It was just totally, something, honestly, it was, how long ago is that? And I'm old, but as I recall, it was about the spirit of Christmas. And then Jesus Christ shows up and he's like, no, wait a second. What are you guys doing? But it was completely profane.
Of course.
It was completely,
yeah, I would hope so. Yeah.
Just took no prisoners, like I honestly, if I try and describe it, I'll get it all wrong. But the thing is, you were laughing so hard you couldn't see half of it. But it just took apart Christianity and Judaism and kids and parents and rabbis and priests, and Jesus himself came under some heavy fire, I gotta say, which which wasn't
on the internet somewhere. Like, it's definitely on the internet. Like, I'm sure you could find it on YouTube or something.
I don't know. That's an interesting question. But anyway, credit Comedy Central and credit that ad sales guy, Larry Divney. He became president of Comedy Central a few years later, but he said, look, I'll sell it,
Right.
Put it on. I'll do what I can. I'll sell it. And of course, the rest is history. But a lot of ad sales guys would say, forget about it.
For
I'm
sure.
not even going to touch it.
Right.
We're not even going to take it out.
I guess pre that, you had kind of Beavis and Butthead sort of, paved the way a little bit. Obviously they were nowhere near as controversial as South Park was. And to this day, I mean, it's insane that show lives to this day doing, and continuing to push those boundaries. I mean, it's wild. I really think it's tribute to what the network started out to be, and, what they were willing to put on the air, in the name of comedy, of course. So if you were there for 8 years, what are some of the highlights of that time besides getting the network built and to the point where you passed it off?
Well, not dying, I mean, that really was a highlight. The first year at Comedy Channel and the first year at Comedy Central after that, I thought they were going to pull the plug any day, so for me, a highlight was going to work and seeing that they didn't kill the whole project. Yeah. And it was really this close because they expected it to be more successful more quickly than it was.
Right.
And when it wasn't, people were unhappy. That's why you didn't mention the book, but I wrote my memoir.
Sure. And
it's called Constant Comedy: How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. The lost my sense of humor part is about putting it together because it was just so oppressively crazy in that first year or two.
I'm sure.
Trying to get it started and trying to keep your sense of humor,
right.
And trying to figure out what to do next so that, as I said, the board or the bosses didn't call and say, look, this isn't going very well. We're going to shut it down.
Right.
So, that was that. I think, there were some other highlights too. I mean, I think I would say that putting the merger together and naming it Comedy Central and then re-emerging was one of the toughest things I ever did in my life, because we had two completely different companies coming together, two completely different ideas of what a comedy network should be. And right. I know that sounds kind of silly, but they were doing, the Ha guys were doing more sitcoms. We were doing more stand-up. I mean, it was just different concepts.
Right.
And we had to put it together and come up with a single vision for the channel, which we did. So to me, that was a great success. After that, a year or two later, well, first of all, we had Jon Stewart working for us from day one.
Right.
at Comedy Channel. And, you know, somebody mentioned, I think it was you, Nick, said he was smart. Yeah. And that's, you know, as soon as I saw him on TV, he was doing a show for us called Short Attention Span Theater.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw him, I said, man, this guy's good. He's smart. And you can tell he was empathetic, you know, he was sensitive. He was funny as hell. And he had a partner, Patty Rossborough. I don't know if you know Patty, another comedian. And he talked a lot and she cracked up most of the time because he was so funny, you know? And I knew he was going to be great. So
was that show pre or post the Jon Stewart Show on MTV?
Pre. He went from there to the MTV show, and then he came back to do the Daily Show.
Yeah, because I lived in the city at the time and used to try to go to see that Jon Stewart taping as much as I could, and I got down to a whole bunch of them, and they were, you know, it was funny because I'm lucky enough to have seen the Johnny Carson show live and Arsenio Hall and a bunch of Letterman shows. So I did that whole like talk show circuit through the years, and I really enjoyed Jon Stewart's show the most because it was just like kind of a party of funniness. Like you never knew what you were going to get on that show, right? Like I remember one of the tapings I went to, Anna Nicole Smith was on, and I'm like, and it was like watching Jon Stewart interview Anna Nicole Smith. You know, you could tell he was being funny, but he also was like too smart for that interview. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
But he positioned it for the audience, which was a bunch of, you know, high school kids and 20-something college, you know, beer guzzlers. So I always really loved that side of Jon. And then obviously the Daily Show, you know, I got my news from news outlets. I obviously, of course, understand why Nick gets his news from the Daily Show, but you know, it was a perfect timing, you know, for what was going on, I think, in the world, you know, at the time, you know, the late 90s, you know, for the Daily Show to come and sort of speak to Nick's generation, if you will. Yeah,
I think that's right. And I think, you know, I think Comedy Central is the only place it could have developed that way.
Sure.
You know, the only place that would have happened. One of the things that was a big deal when I was there that kind of led to the Daily Show was we started covering politics live. Right. We covered the State of the Union address, which, you know, again, people under 30 were not tuning in,
definitely,
you know, dying to know what the State of the Union address was. But we did it live. We had Al Franken as the first host, and Al was basically just commenting on what was going on.
Yeah.
And he was, you know, another guy who's very smart.
Sure.
Very funny. And it was just, I think that was, along with a couple other, one of the most magical moments for me, because it was around that time, that was 1992. It was around that time that the press kind of like looked up and said, wow, these guys are doing stuff that nobody else ever did anywhere on the air.
Right.
And they were talking about the State of the Union address the next day. This thing was unbelievably innovative and funny. And so these guys are really onto something. And after that, you know, we did it every year.
Right.
And I talk about, in my book, I talk about several iterations of it, including one with Dennis Miller. Ultimately, we covered the political conventions, and Jon Stewart was part of that.
Yeah.
He was covering the political conventions for us. So it was a logical next step to do a daily news show.
You're watching another great episode of the Mangina Dialogues, brought to you by Corona Premier, now available on draft.
Sure. So what do you think, you know, about, you know, obviously you've been gone there a long time. What do you think about where the network is today and what, you know, what's happening with it? Do you think it's much different from when you left it, or is it still like in the same mold of what you wanted to set out to create?
Well, let me start by saying it's the 30th anniversary of Comedy Central in April. And for me to look in my rearview mirror and see something I started that long ago still thriving, and something that, you know, really became a cultural icon is really thrilling. You know, I think that's a great thing, because my vision at the time and the way I sold it in was this was going to be a place for comedy. This was going to be the biggest brand in comedy in the United States. Now, arguably at the time, Saturday Night Live was the other, was the only other thing going. Yeah, other channels were around and stuff like that. But, you said comedy in 1993, people said either Saturday Night Live or this new channel, Comedy Central. But it really took over, I think, along the way. And I think it's really hew that vision of being a place for comedy, a place where comedians can launch careers, a place where people could bring their crazy projects and get them put on the air and try things. And, I'm proud of that. That's what I wanted it to be. Now, you ask me what it is today, meaning like what was on last night. I mean, I don't have any particular comment.
Right.
They go through various iterations. They got new management in there for about a year, and new management, they got their hands full trying to figure out how they're going to do it slightly differently than the last guys and still make it more successful. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I mean, I basically watch 2 channels and that's one of the 2 channels.
What's the other one, Greg?
Well, 3 channels.
HGTV.
Yeah, DIY.
The Food Network.
Yeah, I can't watch that. I'll just go on a fucking rampage.
I can't either anymore. No, I watch traditional news and I watch the Comedy Central, because whether it's a stand-up special or a stand-up show or a documentary like the Patrice O'Neill documentary or The Office or Park and Rec, I know when I turn that channel on, I'm going to be entertained regardless what's on that channel. And you can't say that for a lot of channels. I could turn on HBO and watch HBO for 4 days before something comes on that I actually want to see. So Comedy Central is like the hub. I was in Florida last week and I don't even have cable. I just have one of those Roku things that connects to the internet. And all I watched was Comedy Central. Didn't matter what was on.
Well, that is a spectacular success for a channel. For a channel to, because what does every channel promise? We're going to have something on for you all the time that you're going to want to watch. That's how channels work. That's what they want you to think. And Comedy Central, I think you're right, is one of the ones that stayed true to its brand, which was all comedy all the time, and also, edgy, innovative comedy, not just any kind of comedy. Yeah. And so that is what made it so successful. And that's what we started. That's what I did the first 8 years I was there, was trying to figure out how to make that work.
Well, I think it's amazing. And obviously as a comedy fan, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, tremendous, man. Tremendous.
I mean, it's incredible. And, I don't want to transition too far away from comedy, but your next job is like the polar opposite of comedy, right? Like you went from Comedy Central to Court TV.
Right, Court TV. Yeah, that was an interesting transition. And I got a lot of, now, if you worked at comedy, what are you doing here? Kind of things, But it was, listen, first and foremost, I love the television business, and at comedy, I really cut my teeth on how to be a programmer and how to make a channel and all of those things. So when I left comedy, Court TV was pretty much flat on its face. The guy who had started it wanted it to be all courtroom television all the time, That pretty much went south fast, because who wants to watch reruns of courtroom television at night against all the stuff that the networks were putting on and everything else? So I went in and I said, okay, this is a channel, I said, about investigations, about solving crimes, and about the criminal justice system. And I got fascinated with it because, you know what? You have to get fascinated with what you're doing. You just have to get really interested in it. And I did. And there was also something else there that I learned about that I hadn't done anything with before. And that was journalism. Right. I walked into Court TV and there was a newsroom. I mean, there's like 30 journalists sitting there, in those little, at their desks. And these guys were hardcore. These guys are the kinds of guys who would crawl over a glass for a story. Sure. And they wanted to get it right. And I walked in and what do you think they said? What does this guy know about journalism?
Who's the funny guy?
He was just working at comedy. and I had to kind of win them over because they were like, what are you going to do here? You don't know what you're doing. And so that was a big challenge. And I was there for 8 years. Seems like my career falls into like 8 year pods. But I was there for 8 years and we made it extremely successful. And it got bought for a boatload of money. And then that was the second channel that was pulled out from under me. And I said, you know what? I think I'm going to stop with the channels and do something else.
Yeah.
But Court TV, don't kid yourself. I learned a lot about the criminal justice system. I met a lot of fascinating people who wrote about it, who cared about it. I got to work with Nancy Grace, which is a book in itself, believe me.
Oh, I'm sure.
And
because that's right. Like you came in there after the OJ trial, obviously.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I remember that when that was going on, like that's where I would go to watch the daily, the stuff on the OJ trial was Court TV, because that monopolized their day and their programming for that time span, right? So
yes, although see, now you don't remember something about it.
Tell me.
There was another channel that carried the OJ trial that was better distributed and more people saw it on that channel, but they don't remember. You know what it was?
CNN.
Oh,
I definitely
entertainment
didn't
channel.
Right.
Yeah, but I definitely didn't. I was not an E.
And my friend Fran Shea was like the head of programming at E. And I called her up. I was working in comedy at the time. I said, what are you guys doing putting an OJ trial on,
Sure.
And she said, look, it's Hollywood, man.
Yeah.
So we're covering it.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I just remember Court TV. Like that's when I don't even know if I knew that Court TV was a thing until the OJ trial. Yeah. Everyone was so fixated on that, and you wanted to see it 24 hours a day. What was going on in the OJ trial? You go to Court TV, right? And obviously, you came in after that. Like that must have been a pretty hairy transition, where all those eyeballs worldwide or wherever Court TV was on, watching and being riveted to this OJ trial. To then, what do you do? Which, and you explained a little bit about what.
Yeah, that was part of it. But again, you talk about all those people watching it. When I got there, Court TV was in about 25 million homes. Now there were 85 million homes to be had.
Right.
So it was really a baby channel.
Sure.
It just wasn't well distributed. So, you saw it and you thought everybody else was watching it. It just wasn't available in most other places. And so when OJ left and the channel really started to flop, I mean, it was just going nowhere.
Right.
And it was owned by NBC and Liberty Media and Cablevision. And they said, okay, we're going to give it one more chance under new management, me and Henry Schleif, that's the other guy they hired. And if it doesn't work, we'll shut it down.
Right.
And we made it work.
And then when did it go to True TV? Was that under you, or is that?
Well, see, what happened was when I left, I was there when Turner Networks bought it.
Right.
They came in and bought the channel, and they always said they didn't like the courtroom television programming. They just never liked it.
Right.
So I was there for like a year after they showed up, just to kind of put everything to bed with Court TV. And then I left, and then they turned it into True TV, which, is not kind of a single concept channel. It's more of a network, although I don't watch it, so I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of all over the place. You never know what you're going to get on True TV.
Yeah.
You can get the Impractical Jokers, or you can get one of those weird, like 30 greatest motorcycle accidents.
Yeah, it's a strange, like I heard Chris DiStefano was doing a pilot for True TV, and I was like, True TV? Yeah. Like, what? All right, I guess.
Yeah, True TV went through probably like I was consulting at an entertainment company like 8 years ago, and they were developing just a ton of pilots and concepts, and the first place they took every single thing was to True TV. Always. They would take the wackiest things to True TV, and I'm like, it's a surfing show. Like, what? Like, why are you going to True TV? And they're like, oh, they look at everything. I'm like, okay, you're right.
Yeah, well, television changed a lot. I mean, when I was in cable, as I said, in the early days, it was single concept. Yep. The Sci-Fi Channel came along, and all those single concept channels were great. I thought a great way to do television, but channels kind of they kind of became more like networks, where they had all kinds of different programming.
Yeah.
And Comedy Central stayed true to its brand, which I'm glad.
So what? I mean, are you retired now? Are you still are you doing any? Like, what are you doing these days?
The hell are you doing now?
Yeah, besides talking to these two.
What are you, my mother?
Trust me.
What are you up to? Are you doing anything with your life?
Do something. Make something of yourself.
Yeah.
I have been writing
Right.
for the last few years, and I found that I am really enjoying it. I mean, I wrote the book.
Sure.
I wrote the Constant Comedy memoir, which was
You can go to
fun
Amazon and buy the book.
Yeah, go
Right.
to Amazon and buy the book. Please go to Amazon and buy the book.
Buy
No,
the
it's a real. It turned out really well. I didn't even start out to write the book. I just started writing some stuff about what was going on then, and people who listened to it said, "Wow, we didn't know you did that. Why don't you write more on that?" So that's how I wrote that book, and it came out funny, but it really is the true story of what happened.
Right.
And what I went through. So it's a good book. Yeah. And if people want to see, find out more about the book or me, they can go to my website too, artbellwriter.com. But anyway, yeah. So I'm working on fiction now. I wrote some short stories, just had a short story published in a literary magazine. And that's what I'm doing. I love it. And I play drums, not in a band anymore because pandemic.
Right.
And I play piano. I play drums and piano.
Nick's
So I got stuff to do.
Yeah, that's great. What was Court TV your last TV gig?
Well, it depends on your definition. I spent time after that doing consulting at a bunch of different networks.
Right.
One of my favorites was I worked for Panasonic when they were trying to get a 3D television network started.
Right.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, sure do.
With DirecTV?
Yeah, I actually bought a TV with 3D at the time.
There you go. Was it a Panasonic or a Sony? Be gentle.
It definitely wasn't a Panasonic.
Okay, that's not gentle. I don't care. I had no real kind of.
No, I don't remember what it was, but I remember that I went out when 3D TVs first started coming out. I'm like, I want to get one of those.
Yeah. So what happened?
I never watched, like barely, because nothing was out in 3D. Like the 3D network, which I know we had because I had DirecTV, there wasn't a lot, and then there still wasn't a lot that you could get on DVD or anything. And I remember I went out and bought a whole bunch of movies that I never would have bought just because they had a 3D version, and I watched them on our TV, and I'm like, eh.
You know what? I mean, it's an interesting thing to talk about because it turns out, and this is interesting, that if you want to make video more realistic, you know what you do? You make the sound better.
Right. Yeah.
And they found this out when they were doing simulation stuff in the Army for tanks and planes and everything else. You make the sound better and people think it's more real.
Right.
You add 3D, it doesn't really kind of take it that far. Now, I will say that when you see a 3D movie, that's cool. On a big screen.
Yep.
That's really cool. And you know who else loves it? Directors.
Right.
They love working in 3D because it's another storytelling device for them.
But it wasn't very expensive to at the time shoot like 3D, because I remember I had some friends who were doing a project for IMAX and they were doing it in 3D.
Well, stop right there. IMAX is not only 3D, but they had that large format,
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they had, I think the film was like this wide, it's like gigantic.
Right.
And very heavy canisters and all that stuff. It was really hard to work with. But 3D itself, they actually innovated the technology. Is this interesting to you guys? They actually innovated the technology.
Yes, it is. Yes.
They did innovate the technology. So by the time we stopped, they had handheld 3D cameras, that had two lenses mounted on them.
Yep.
That could, they were point and shoot cameras. So it really got a lot easier. Yeah, in the old days, it was two giant 35 millimeter rigs.
Sure.
But that wasn't going to hold up for very long. So
right.
Yeah, it got like anything else. The technology is always going to make things smaller, cheaper, and better.
You can pretty much have a 3D camera in your iPhone these days.
Yeah. Right.
So that's what you're doing now. You're just writing. Is that what you're going to do? Just
when you say just writing, you do a disservice to.
No, I'm a writer. I
millions
understand.
You're so demeaning, Greg.
No. Listen.
That's like someone saying, "Oh, you're just in television."
No.
What happened?
Yeah. What about movies? No?
Yeah. Well, I mean, come on. You're just a TV
You
guy.
couldn't get into radio. You went into television.
What are you, a gym teacher too? No.
What? Wow, Greg's hitting them all today. Are you a janitor? Are you a school janitor?
No. I'm a writer too. Like I've written my entire.
I will say, I'll back Greg up here. He is.
I didn't know that.
Obviously there's nothing to shit on about writing at all. I meant that like, I'd be in an envious position if I was going to just focus on writing all day long and just make that my next career, move. I mean, you obviously already have a book out. Like that's a tremendous accomplishment.
Thank you. Yeah, it is. But I find I enjoy writing so much, and there's so much to learn about it that I hope I just keep doing it. I hope I get more stuff published. I mean, I have gotten some stuff published, but I'm also working on I don't want to say it too loud because it jinxes it, novel.
I'm like that too. Whenever I have something I'm excited about, I don't say it out loud. I'm like, you can't say it out loud because then it goes in the universe and things could fuck with it.
I might as well throw the thing in a drawer right now. It's never going to see it.
No, you said it here. It's gonna go to the top now.
Yeah,
but the thing is, I find writing really really interesting. Wait a second, I got a big question for you guys. Did you read my book?
I did not. I'm going to, because this just came about in the last few days since one of our producers.
All right. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
no, I have no problem.
No, I haven't read it either, but I'm definitely going to order it. I just ordered a bunch of books. So
check it out and let me know what you think.
I will, for sure.
I like to hear from my audience.
Yeah. No. Yes, how is it self-published or is it through a publisher?
No. It's published by Ulysses Press, which is a small press, and it's not that small actually. It's an independent press, they call it.
Right.
But in Berkeley, they've been around for 15, 20 years.
And are you selling the books yourself on your website, or is Amazon the place?
I'm going door to door, basically. No,
during a pandemic, ballsy. That's good. Good
that was a joke I always made to my wife. Am I going to have to go door to door with this thing? No. It's it's out in hardcover, and it's also available in ebooks. And you buy both of those on Amazon, and you can also go to a bookstore. They're in bookstores.
Sure. So, I mean, obviously, it's great timing with the 30th anniversary of the channel. Are you doing anything around that? Is the channel doing anything? Like what's happening?
Okay, so do you know anybody there? I don't know anybody there anymore. I know one guy, and I tried to call him just to ask him, like, are you guys doing anything? And like, I'd like to send those guys a book so that maybe somebody would get interested in it. I myself and a guy who was at comedy at the beginning named Vinny Favale. Is that a name?
That name rings a bell. Yeah.
You know why? He was on the Howard Stern show.
Okay, that's why.
If you listen to Howard, you heard about Vinny.
Yeah, Greg's a big Stern fan, so yeah.
Yeah, really? Yeah, well, they're friends. But Vinny we started with the channel together.
Right.
And we kind of left around the same time. He left a little earlier than me and went to CBS and became a, executive in charge of late night there. So he had a great career, but he called me up and he said, hey, we should really do a podcast, a limited series about the beginning of Comedy Central, have some people on. And I said, yeah, great idea. And then like 20 minutes later, I get a notice that there's a press release out.
Oh God.
saying we're doing, then he put the press release out through this press thing. And people started calling me like, hey, great news on the podcast. And I'm like, I just found out about it myself. Anyway, we are doing the podcast. It's going to start April 1st.
Oh, that's amazing.
Which is the anniversary. April is the 30th anniversary. I don't know if Comedy Central's doing anything. I hope they are. I wish, I'd like to do something, with them.
Right.
But
no better day to launch it than on April Fool's Day.
Yeah, that's what we thought, I guess, at the time. Although, yeah, I as much as I remembered about those days, there are things I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm sure. Me too.
Sure.
Me too.
People ask, actually, when they read the book, they say, how do you remember all that stuff? And I remembered the stuff I remembered, and I wrote there's a lot of dialogue in it, a lot of funny scenes, meetings and stuff. And I remember things that people said, and that was kind of the armature for those scenes. I just remembered enough of it to write it all out. So I did not do any research for it.
Do you think about making it into a movie, like a feature?
People have mentioned that to me. The rights are still available, guys, if you guys are in a producing mood.
All right, need some.
But
actors.
like, who would we get to play me? I don't know.
Greg could play you.
Yeah, Greg could.
I'm a behind the scenes guy.
You could play me in my writing years.
Nick will have to shave the beard. He can play you in the younger years.
Yeah, I could do that.
Anyway, I have to say it's been a lot of fun writing because I heard from a lot of people from the day, back in the
Sure.
day that I hadn't heard from, and I've made a lot of new friends. A lot of comedians have called up and gotten in touch with me and said, "Hey, man, that was cool. It was a great book. I didn't know that stuff happened," and it's just been another great adventure in my life.
Wow, that's amazing.
I'm really glad I did it.
Well, really, I mean, I can speak for Nick, but I'll let him speak for himself. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yes,
This is
thank
awesome.
you
Oh, thanks
so
for talking to
much.
me.
We obviously love talking to guys that are in that, really as far as our coming into comedy, were there and provided all this entertainment for us for years. I'm obviously much older than Nick, or not much, but old enough to be much
It's very
really
obvious.
older than Nick. I'm better looking and,
Yeah, that's fine.
funnier, but
Yeah.
really thank you very much for doing what you did and having the foresight to create a network for comedians.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. So everyone can find the book at Amazon. Hit up your website.
Buy the book, God damn it.
The book, people who listen to funny people. Come on.
I love that endorsement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Keep in touch, and we'll
I
be
will.
looking out for the podcast. And when that launches, we can either have, do something else with you, or,
Great.
give you some recommendations for people to go on and stuff, because obviously people should talk to you guys.
Terrific. I appreciate
Awesome.
that. All right. Thanks very much.
for taking the time.
My pleasure. Take care.